what they are also doing is those villages that are still there, about 120 of them are unrecognized, which means they de-recognize the fact that those villages and towns exist. Almost 250,000 people live in those towns and villages, which are called the unrecognized habitations. This is the name in Israel. What does this mean? It means no road, no water, no gas, no electricity, no services. Of course, no buses. Well, they don't exist. Those people do not exist. And of course, a lot of them actually leave, because can you imagine living in an area like this, say, in Wales, Scotland, or in England, that all your life, your children will not get support for their schools, you will not have support from the state for a medical clinic, there will be no street lighting, you will not be able to operate a computer and connect to the internet. You know, I could go on. I mean, and these are not the worst things. And of course, all this leads to the removal of more and more Palestinians from Palestine, separating the Palestinians from the country. That is the crime that has started before 1948. It has never stopped, and it continues. And our government and the US government are the guarantors of that crime. And the last one I mention is the removal of Arabic from visibility in Israel and in Palestine. Now, on the Palestinian side, what does this mean? You know, what would you do if you were in that situation? You would not accept it, I would not accept it, and we would fight against it, and so do the Palestinians. And the first struggle is the struggle for memory, for story, for narrative, for the right to tell your story. This is why you're here tonight, because this is what those films are about. They are keeping the story, the memory alive. The memory, the story is painful, no doubt. However, without that painful story, there's even less chance of a resolution for the conflict. Because that story is important for Palestinians, but it's important for you. It's important for us Israelis to understand what we have done to Palestine. In the way, I'm not comparing, please, yeah. But as a Jew whose family was destroyed in the Holocaust, I have really very good friends in Germany, and we were talking about this for many years, about how people of my age in Germany had to undergo a denazification program in the schools to understand what the Nazis have done to homosexuals, to Jews, to communists, to trade unionists, to a whole number of normal people like you and me. And of course, a lot of them had a problem with that. But they don't have a problem with that now. They understand that that was necessary to deconstruct the Nazi narrative. Now, of course, it is not the same. Please, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that we need to deconstruct the Zionist narrative for similar type of reasons, and this has to happen. And partly what Palestine is doing is producing culture that does that. It also fights the daily injustices of the occupation by showing them, and you'll see that in a number of the films, and also in the films that you don't see here, because fortunately so many films are produced in Palestine that not a single Palestinian film festival, and there are more than 100 this year in Europe alone, can show all those films, and you can't show them. There are too many of them, and there are too many good ones to include in one festival. Well, that is great. That is good. And, of course, the struggle is to establish a Palestinian culture without a state, without safety, without actually knowing where you're going to be tomorrow. Will you be able to get to hospital with your wife who is going to give birth? Will she be able to give birth? Without dying? Will she be stopped in the ambulance at the checkpoint? More than 100 women died in childbirth on the way to hospital already. Will your old mother or father get to hospital and they got a heart attack? Will your son or daughter survive because the medicine is away and you can't get to it? So it is a daily struggle. It is not about romantic narratives, grand narratives of fighting. Every Palestinian is fighting all the time. They're fighting to survive. They're fighting to be human. They're fighting to get to school. They're fighting to get to hospital. They're fighting to get to university. And that is a lot of courage. And they're fighting to make films. My friends in Gaza don't have tapes, don't have DVDs. They don't have electricity for more than 2 hours. So the last week I spoke to my friend in Gaza. He said, you know, every time I try to put something onto YouTube, the electricity runs out, and you know YouTube, and you know that unless you put the whole thing, you have to start again. He said, for 7 days I was trying with one clip of 1 minute, and we never had the electricity long enough, and the clip is still not on YouTube. And of course, he can't send me the clip physically. All he can do is upload it. Well, physically, nothing comes in and goes out. Even rice is not allowed in, so obviously tapes. Well, tapes are, of course, the main device that terrorists are using. You know, tapes or DVDs are very dangerous, and therefore Israelis are not allowing them in. And obviously, to bring the Palestinian narrative, not just Palestinians and Israelis, which is important enough, but to you. To you especially, and to you generally. To you generally, as part of the human race, we have a responsibility, and we have a role to support each other. And our rights depend on each other. We can have rights if you can have rights. And we should never forget that. But also because we live in Britain, and Britain is the one that invented the problem of Palestine. In 1916, let us not ever forget this, Britain has decided unilaterally, before it ever was in Palestine, that it will support the case of the Europeans against the indigenous population in Palestine. It will give them the right over the country, and then planned to, of course, take it over. It did take it over in 1918. This is not just the usual run-of-the-mill colonialism. This is really like the worst example of colonialism, of you promise someone what is not even yours yet, and actually never was, and will not be. And I want to talk very briefly, I'm coming to an end, about some of the functions of storytelling, not necessarily in fiction films, in the Palestinian films, but actually across the fiction and documentary divide. One of the simple functions is a therapeutic one, is a Freudian, if you want, function. To talk about it is therapeutic. To show it is therapeutic, even when it's painful. And let me say, especially when it's painful. We know that. Yeah. There is, of course, the importance of oral history. We have to build a social memory in Palestine, because the country is, for example, divided into 2 parts, and those 2 cannot communicate, not even by telephone, because the Israelis are jamming the Joel frequencies. You know, so you know, how do you run a country which is divided into 36 different Bantustans with 700 plus 700 checkpoints in the West Bank, and the biggest prison in the world with 2 million people in Gaza, and with no communication, with no medicine, with most food stuff not allowed, with not enough petrol to actually run the cars and the ambulances. Yeah? This is a very difficult thing, and it's even more difficult to build a social memory which is coherent and which is national, not nationalistic, I don't think, but national in the sense that it covers the country.